It's a rare opportunity for all of us to, that we look forward to every year. And it's special for a number of different reasons. First of all, it's the one day where all of our youth editors and contributors around the world can have an in-depth conversation with each other and really get to know each other in small breakout groups. And today we're very excited to have people joining from multiple time zones. We had 8 in the morning, and I think we have 7 time zones now. And having this second session gives us an opportunity to make sure that as many people as possible can be part of this very special experience, regardless of where they are geographically. But the origins of this special format go back in KidSpirit history for almost 10 years to an in-person event we had called Table Talk. And a few of you might remember it. At this intergenerational event, we felt it would be true to KidSpirit's mission, really true, to have several thought leaders in their respective fields have a panel conversation in tandem with KidSpirit youth editors. This result was absolutely fascinating for everybody involved. And that's what we're doing for this first hour. In a few moments, a conversation between our adult experts and our teens will commence, along with our moderator being all of them at the same table, as it were. This is a unique and important conversation on the topic of well-being, which has special resonance for us all today, and how creativity can impact our well-being. We're very excited to have KidSpirit editors and contributors hailing from around the world, from the United States, Pakistan, India, Ukraine, Jordan, Paraguay, and Taiwan. And we're also delighted to have special guests who are here to watch and learn from all our panelists, regardless of their age, and hear from our community of participants through their questions for the panel. So special welcome to KidSpirit board members, editorial board liaisons, as well as KidSpirit alumni who are with us, parents of current editors, and special guests. So now before we jump in, I'd love to take a moment for all of us to just look around the Zoom room and greet each other. This is such a special opportunity. So if you haven't done so yet, please turn on your camera so we can all see each other and just have a look around, and let's wave at everybody because it's so nice to see everybody here. Thank you all. It's really great to see you. Yay! Thank you for doing that. So in a few minutes, we'll begin with a panel discussion featuring our 2 distinguished, awesome panelists and 2 of our own KidSpirit editors. At the end, we'll ask that all of our young participants will ask questions if they have them. When that time comes, please raise your hand on Zoom using the raise hand function, and our moderator, Lewis Dabney, will call on you. And then after the panel, KidSpirit participants will break into smaller groups and have the special opportunity to go deeper into our topic through conversation and creative activities. So now, without further ado, I am very honored to ask each of you to give your best attention here to our guest KidSpirit editor, who is going to introduce our moderator, Adya Serene, from our India editorial board. Welcome, and you have the floor.
Hi, hello everyone. So today I'll be introducing Lewis. Lewis is a leader in the field of conflict resolution with 25 years experience specializing in civil rights mediation, restorative justice, ethnic and religious conflict, program management, system design, and training. He's a leading expert in the mediation of disputes pertaining to the Americans with Disabilities Act and has lectured on various aspects of conflict resolution practice at universities in North and South America, South and Southeast Asia, and Europe. Lewis is an executive director of the Keybridge Foundation, a non-profit alternative dispute resolution practice that provides a range of conflict resolution, program management, training, and technical assistance services to clients in government, business, education, nonprofits, and unions. He has trained and mentored hundreds of mediators across the United States and served in several leadership positions in the Association for Conflict Resolution. He was a winner of the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution 2022 Distinguished Alumnus Award too.
Oh gosh, thank you, Adya. Very sweet, and such an honor to be introduced by you. And look forward to hearing from you more further in the along in the program when we'll have a video about KidSpirit Award winners for this year. So lovely to be with you all. And, especially Wendy MacNaughton and Sonja Lyubomirsky. It's wonderful to have a chance to be with you to explore the subject of well-being and creativity and happiness and art. And as everyone here knows, like as great as the KidSpirit contributors are in writing, art is such a big part of our international community as well. So it's really wonderful to have an opportunity to have an exchange around this. And it's very timely. Youth today are dealing with so many serious issues, and it's so beautiful how authentically everyone who's a part of the KidSpirit community contributes on these issues, whether it's climate change or gun violence or depression or any of the stark challenges that our world is facing it together and supporting each other's well-being and creativity gives us all the sort of the energy and the force to move forward together and to process these things. So in true KidSpirit fashion, we're going to have some KidSpirit editorial contributors introduce our adult panelists, and then have like a little fishbowl discussion, as Elizabeth was saying. And then later on, we'll have an opportunity for some people, some youth contributors to jump in and ask some questions about that too, and then have some breakouts later. So without further ado, I'd love to pass the mic to Sabine to introduce one of our panelists.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sabine. Sonja Lyubomirsky, Ph.D., is a distinguished professor of psychology at the University of California, Riverside. Originally from Russia, she received her A.B. summa cum laude from Harvard University and her Ph.D. in social/personality psychology from Stanford University. Lyubomirsky's teaching and mentoring of students have been twice recognized with the Faculty of the Year Award and the Faculty Mentor of the Year Award. Lyubomirsky's research on the possibility of lastingly increasing happiness via gratitude, kindness, and connection interventions has been honored with an honorary doctorate from the University of Basel, the Christopher J. Peterson Gold Medal, the UC Riverside Distinguished Research Lecturer Award, and a Templeton Positive Psychology Prize, among many others. Her work has been written up in hundreds of magazines and newspapers, and she has appeared in multiple TV shows, radio shows, and feature documentaries around the world. Lyubomirsky is the author of several books, including the best-selling title, The How of Happiness, A Scientific Approach to Getting the Life You Want. In her work, Lyubomirsky has focused on developing a science of human happiness. To this end, her research addresses three critical questions. What makes people happy? Is happiness a good thing? And how can we make people happier still? Lyubomirsky lives happily in beautiful Santa Monica, California, with her family.
Satya, could you introduce Wendy?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Satya. Wendy MacNaughton's work is based on the practices of drawing, social work, and storytelling. She combines the practice of deep looking, listening, and drawing to create stories of often overlooked people, places, and things. Wendy has worked on varied projects across mediums and fields and in collaboration with numerous groups and individuals. But one thing stays consistent. Wendy uses drawing as a vehicle for connection. As a visual columnist for the New York Times and California Sunday Magazine, Wendy drew stories everywhere from high school cafeterias to Guantanamo Bay. She's authored and drawn 2 books, How to Say Goodbye and Meanwhile in San Francisco, and illustrated many others, including the #1 New York Times bestseller, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat by Samin Nosrat, and New York Times bestseller, The Gutsy Girl by Caroline Paul. She's the creator and drawer-in-chief of Draw Together, a participatory drawing show for kids, and The Grown-Ups Table, lessons and community for drawing-minded adults. She's also the co-founder of Women Who Draw with Julia Rothman, an advocacy database launched in 2016 to increase visibility and opportunities for underrepresented artists, illustrators, and cartoonists. She lives in Oakland, but you can often find her on the road, speaking at conferences, universities, or companies, or in her mobile studio, built inside the back of a Honda Element, doing the things she likes best, drawing.
Thanks, Satya. And as Sonja, could you introduce Sabine?
Absolutely. And Sabine, by the way, you're one of the few people who knows how to pronounce my name, so you did an amazing job. So Sabine is a 16-year-old writer of Canadian and Rwandan origin who grew up and lives in Haiti. And this multicultural young woman spends much of her time traveling around Africa with her parents on business trips. And it's my understanding she's in Rwanda right now. In her spare time, Sabine enjoys reading books, particularly those centered around relatable and chaotic female characters. I love that. I'd love to get some recommendations. She also loves to write short stories in addition to her op-ed articles for her blog, where she provides her unique perspective on current events. And overall, this young writer is a curious and adventurous individual who is passionate about learning and discovering new cultures. Great to meet you.
Great to meet you too. Thank you.
Is it my turn to introduce Satya?
Go for it.
Cool. Thank you also for that beautiful intro, Satya. That was really beautiful. This is Satya Shah. Satya attends Beacon High School in Manhattan, New York, where he is in 11th grade. Yeah, loves to act, sing, play piano, trombone, and guitar. Again, piano, trombone, and guitar. He's considering a career in music therapy, which I can't wait to ask him about. Satya has worked with KidSpirit since 2017 when he was 9 years old. So nice to meet you, Satya.
And Sonja, can you introduce us to your work?
Oh, of course. Yes. So I do research on happiness, and some people call it well-being, but I just call it happiness because that's really, I think, the word that everyone understands. And I've been doing research on happiness for almost 35 years. So for a really long time, really since I graduated from college. And back when I started, it was really considered this like fuzzy, kind of unscientific thing to study. Almost, and no one was studying it. Now it's a kind of a big field, and economists study happiness and neuroscientists study happiness. So there's really a lot, and I'm happy to talk, answer your questions about it. What I do in my work mostly is we do what we call happiness interventions. And a happiness intervention is like a clinical trial. And you all know what a clinical trial is from probably following like the COVID vaccine research. But in clinical trials, you might be testing a new medication or a vaccine or a surgical technique, and you might compare it with like a sham surgery or a placebo medication, a placebo vaccine. And you ask questions like, what's the appropriate dosage? How often should you take it? Should some people not take it? And we ask very similar questions about happiness strategies. So for example, I study gratitude. And so we ask questions like, does gratitude actually work to make people happier when you express gratitude? It turns out there's some circumstances under which gratitude might make people less happy. So that's an interesting question. And then other questions like, what's the proper dosage of gratitude? So like, should you kind of count your blessings every day? Or maybe could that backfire because you're sort of doing it too much and you can't think of things to be grateful for? So things like that. And maybe some people, maybe it's not a great strategy for them, or maybe they should practice it a certain way. So kind of the bottom line of my research is after all these years, really 3 decades, I realized a number of years ago that almost everything that works to make people happier works because it makes them feel more connected to others. Although others could be defined broadly. It could be to God, it could be to your pet. Usually it's another person. And so we find, for example, when you ask people to do acts of kindness for others, to write gratitude letters, they think about other people. They engage with other people, they connect with other people. So connection is really, it's kind of a cliche, but I've landed on a cliche after all these years. The connection is the key to happiness. So that's kind of the overall. I know I have I think a couple more minutes. There's also lots of interesting questions that are more specific. So it kind of depends on what you guys are interested in talking about more. We have some studies looking at how the body reacts to the pursuit of happiness. So for example, we did a study where we asked people to do acts of kindness for others or for themselves, or do some kind of control activity. And we collected blood from them before and after. We sent the blood to be assayed by a biologist, and I'm not a biologist, so I had to rely on a collaborator. And we found that people who did acts of kindness for others versus for yourself actually showed changes in their gene expression, in their immune RNA gene expression in their blood, associated with a healthier immune profile. So they showed less pro-inflammatory gene expression. So think like more inflammation is bad, right? So you want less pro-inflammatory gene expression. So that was sort of fascinating to us. We also have some work on digital media and social media and happiness, and obviously a very important and question that people are talking about now is it sort of bad for people, for young people's, especially young people's connection and happiness to use social media, digital media? Of course, the answer is complicated, right? It depends. And it's a complicated question. And then finally, I was just at a conference on the psychology of technology and talking to collaborators about some work we're doing where we're using AI to hopefully in the service of good as opposed to evil, because we know, there's sort of dangers and there's benefits. We're using AI to help people become happier, right? So sort of almost like a coach that helps you maybe express gratitude or engage with other people. So this is like really, really cutting edge, very, very beginning work in that area. Yeah, I mean, I can talk, I'm not sure how much, do I have more time?
Yeah, a couple more minutes and then we'll pass it to Wendy, but keep going. But I'm just
Great.
like, this is such a public, this is such a deep public service. Like what you're doing here is such a gift to the world. So I'm all ears.
Thank you so much. It's certainly a subject that everyone wants to talk about. You could argue that all of us want to be happy. In fact, I also do I'll end by talking about some cultural differences around the world. People do seem to all want to be happy, although they might use a different word to describe that. They might use different language to describe that wish. They might pursue happiness differently. Kind of everyone to some extent kind of wants to be happy, depending on how you define it. And I could also talk about definitions of happiness. And in fact, maybe I should say that now before I stop, is that many researchers define happiness as having two components. And the first component is basically the experience of fairly frequent positive emotions. So happy people, on a frequent basis might experience joy, serenity, curiosity, affection, pride, enthusiasm, right? So it sort of depends on the person, what positive emotions kind of you tend to experience the most. Not all the time, of course, and negative emotions are also useful when they're not chronic or intense, right? So if you see injustice, it's adaptive to be angry about it. And it prompts you to do something about it, for example. But then anyway, so positive emotions is the biggest component, as I would say the hallmark of happiness, but that's not really sufficient. The other component of happiness is having a sense that your life is pretty good, that you're progressing towards your life goals, that you're satisfied with your life. But of course, lots of people are not so satisfied with their lives for some very valid reasons. But those are kind of the components of happiness. And so some people focus on one versus the other. So life satisfaction and positive emotions.
Thanks so much, Sonja. Really, really great. And I can't wait to mix it up around some of the what you're raising. And Wendy, share with us about some of the things that you're known for.
I love how Sonja and my work interacts with all the work of all the young people on this call. I think it's just such a cool thing. So I'm going to try and share my screen really quickly, and I'm going to show you. Let me see if I can do this. You guys, I draw using a pen and paper, so I'm like not the most. Could I get screen sharing, please? Screen sharing.
Just granted.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so you guys are good. Sorry, it's not pristine, but just going to show you some quick pictures, and then. But while I'm doing this, I'm actually going to ask if everybody can just grab a pencil or a pen and a piece of paper while I'm talking. Okay, so if you need to run and get that, More important to do that than to listen to me blab on. Okay, so you see a lot of pictures here. These are all drawings. I draw using pen and watercolor. The reason I do that is because I can do it from life, meaning that I can stand on a corner, just like I am in the upper left-hand corner of that, stand on a corner holding a sketchbook in a neighborhood that I'm curious about, in a community that I want to know more about. And kind of like a drawing ethnography anthropology person, I hang out and I draw and I talk to people and I write down everything they say and I draw everything. And I spend anywhere from a few hours to up to a month with folks, and then end up telling stories. I'm trained as a social worker as well. And so I tell stories from a subject-centered perspective. So I use only the words of the people who I speak with, and I try to center the stories of people who might not often have a spotlight. I think some of the most valuable stories are not in the spotlight, and we need to hear more of those. So I've done that like everywhere from, as you can see here, on the corner of 6th Street in San Francisco. I'm from San Francisco, and I thought it was good to start in my own backyard and learn about the cultures and communities that I did not know a lot about, tell those stories. And meanwhile, in San Francisco, I've done it throughout the US. That is a bootmaker who, he and I could not see this country more differently, the US more differently. But after spending about 5 hours with Don the bootmaker, we ended up, I would say, we're friends. He calls me his lefty lesbian friend. Like, you know, we're so different. Couldn't be more different. But we're friends, because when we spend a lot of time with people, we end up finding we have more in common, or at least some things in common, and develop a friendship that way. I've also done a lot of illustration work. That means collaboration with other folks, like the book Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, which also kind of like in my work, I'm looking to make people and stories that we might not hear about accessible to everybody. Somebody knows, right, who I collaborated with on this book is looking to do that with food, right? I'm going to quickly flip over one more page, and then I'm going to make you guys start drawing. During the pandemic, a lot of kids needed something to do and had processed feelings. And I'm interested in drawing as a vehicle for connection and for experiencing our emotions. We experience our emotions with our bodies. We think we're doing it all up here, but they're actually living in our bodies. Drawing is something we do physically, right? And so it's a really great way for us to process our emotions and figure out, get out of our heads, get into our bodies and figure them out. So that's what we did during the pandemic with Draw Together. And with enough about that, I can talk about it, but better is that we all experience it together. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick little exercise with you all so you can experience part of this. I learned this from an amazing, amazing cartoonist named Linda Barry, and Lyndabarry. I say that because everybody should know about her. And I'm going to ask you all to take a piece of paper and take a pen and put it down in the middle of it. Like you're just put a dot in the middle of it. What we're about to do is a very simple exercise that's going to get us into our bodies. Drawing can help us lower our heart rates. It can help us center. It can drop our blood pressure. It can help us focus. It can stress us, bring down our anxiety, and we can do it in a minute. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to look at me first. It's hard with this blur, I know, but we're going to draw one of these. Very simple, a spiral. Okay. And we're going to go outwards as we do it. I'm going to give you a rule. It's that you're never going to, as you're going around, touch the inside of the line that you were drawing before. It'll make sense as you're drawing. You just don't want to touch the line. You want to kind of go. So you're spiraling out and you don't want to touch the line that you drew before. Okay, ready? So we're just going to draw a spiral for 1 minute. Let's start by taking a deep breath. Let it out. And just start drawing your spiral and go slow. And you're moving outwards. And just remember, you want to get as close as you can. Get as close as you can to that inside line. Really focus and try and almost touch the line, but don't. Pretend it's like an electric fence. And if you touch it, you might get a little bit of shock. It's not a bad one, but you just don't want to do it. So keep going, go around, tight, tight spiral. Now, as we're doing this, let's start paying attention to our breathing. And as we're going up the spiral, let's breathe in. And we go down, let's breathe out. We'll go up the spiral, breathe in, and down, breathe out. And you notice that as your spiral gets bigger and your breathing is going up the spiral and down, but the spiral is getting bigger and your breath's going to get a little bit longer. If you want to pause the top and the bottom, you can do that, but keep moving slow and steady. Pay attention to your breathing. Notice your shoulders, drop them if they're up against your ears. Hope they're not against your knees. Keep going. Just another moment. And when you get to the bottom, stop at the bottom. And then just draw like a little heart or a star and stop. That's it. Okay, stop. Now look back up at me. Now check in with your body. Just do a quick check-in, do a quick scan. Do you feel any different now than before you started? Shoulders a little lower. Maybe you're just a little more dropped in. Yeah. It's pretty incredible how when we just stop, slow down, and use our hands and a pencil to pay attention, to look closely, to get into our bodies and breathe, how we can settle in and become present. Drawing for me, I am not interested in doing good drawings. I mean, anybody can do that. You go in, you study enough, you can learn to draw anything, really. It's just practice. That's all it is. I'm interested in drawing as a process to get into our bodies, to help us pay attention, to look closely at the world and all the people in it, and to connect in a really meaningful way with each other. Drawing is magic, and anybody can do this kind of drawing. You just did it. Good job. That's it.
Totally amazing. I don't know, just like for me, the synchronization of like breath and visual and kinesthetic, like that synthesis there was really grounding.
I'm so glad.
Passing it over to our youth contributors. Satya, do you have anything to ask of either panelist?
I do. Wendy, I was wondering about your process for writing a book. Like, what gives you the most inspiration? What's your favorite medium? Like, how do you go about those projects? Oh, you're muted.
Again, analog. Sorry, y'all. I have drawn, I think 12 books or something like that, and I've written and drawn a couple. So I'll say this. Every book, no matter what role I play in it, is always a collaboration. Nobody ever does anything alone. Even when you just see one name on the cover, there's a whole bunch of people behind it. There's editors and copy checkers. I mean, there's so many agents, so many people, researchers. But I'll talk about when I write and draw a book together. I'm collaborating not only with all those people that I just named, but also with all the people who are in the book. All of the subject matter, the people that I draw, and the stories that I tell, I really try to center them in it. I go into a project with a question, and I always think I know the answer. And I start down a path, and I'm kind of trying to prove myself right. And I keep bouncing against all these walls, and I can't get through it. And it happens every time with every story, with every book, everything. And eventually I have to let all that go. And if my question is still interesting to me, I have to open my ears up and open my eyes up and start asking really open-ended questions and be open to going a radical different direction. I'll give you an example. I did a book recently called How to Say Goodbye. And I spent a year in a hospice caregiving place. And I went in thinking that I was going to do a story about family members and the folks who are dying. And I tried really hard to tell that story. But after being there for a few months, I realized it was the caregivers that had so much wisdom to share. So I switched my lens. I started focusing on that. And I just went with where that took me. I took the drawings that I did from life. And I took all the interviews that I did with the caregivers, put them together, and made a little book. And then published it with a publisher named Bloomsbury. I hope that answers your question.
So Rich, Wendy, and things coming up for me about what drew you to that subject and what you came away with. But Sabeel, do you have anything you'd like to ask? And again, we're you unmuted, ahead of the curve.
Yes, I do have some questions for Sonja. I actually prepared a few, but I'm not sure how much time we have. But the first one is, I'd like to know the elevator speech on you and why you decided happiness of all things.
Thank you, Isabel. I actually just changed. I have like an origin story of how I started doing this work on happiness, but I just changed it because I met with my college advisor who I had not seen in 34 years. And he told me about some conversations that we had in when I was 20 years old that I didn't remember. But the origin story is that I went to study psychology, social psychology in graduate school, and my advisor was actually one of the world's experts on conflict and negotiation. Maybe Lewis knows him. And he was working on Israelis and Palestinians and various conflicts around the world. Anyway, someone started asking this question, like, why are some people happier than others, and what is the secret to happiness? It's just such a fascinating question. So that was the beginning of sort of my career, asking that question. And so I guess that's kind of like the short answer. But then when I met with my old college advisor, he said that I was very interested in college about why my mom was so unhappy and that I was a lot happier. And I talked about that a lot. And the facts that he remembered were true. So I know, so I don't think it was like a false memory. But I mean, it's people, happiness is the holy grail, I guess that's one way to think about it. That it's something that, pretty much everyone wants, depending on how you define it. And then to study it scientifically is not easy. Lots of people have opinions about how to, and they're valid opinions. Like your grandmother probably has really great wisdom about how to be happy. A lot of people write emails and they'll say to me, everything you study is in the Bible. And that's kind of true too. There's a lot of wisdom in the Bible, from people who've contributed to it. But we actually do experiments to test that wisdom. So like with gratitude or forgiveness, for example, forgiveness is supposed to be a good thing, but is it? We need to kind of test, and people do studies where they actually have people think about someone in your life who has transgressed against you, who've done you wrong, who you've had trouble, you've never forgiven them, and now try to forgive them. Try, at least in your mind, write a letter. You don't have to send it. In fact, probably don't send it. So that's not often a good idea. And what are the effects of that? So those are the kind of studies we do. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and we have about 15, 20 minutes to range around these subjects together. I'd love for Satya and Sibyl to ask a couple more questions of Wendy and Sonja, and then also flip the script a little bit, because to see what you all are interested in our KidSpirit panelists. So Satya, do you have another thought for Wendy?
I was wondering if you ever face artist block, or if your creativity ever faltered because you write about such hard topics and so many things.
I would say that's a great question. Has my creativity ever faltered? Today? 12 times already today? Yeah. Okay. It's that's just part of it. I think that mistakes, first of all, what is that? It just means that things don't turn out like we expect. And that what making art literally is not knowing what is going to happen, right? If you plan something and you know exactly how it's going to turn out, maybe that's some kind of art, but it's not what I am interested in. And in terms of so yes, I get blocks all the time. A lot of times that comes along with perfectionism. I can totally be a perfectionist. I think a lot of probably folks who are here in this KidSpirit community are, because I think that comes along with being kind of a high achieving person. If you really want to do, good work in the world and great things, sometimes we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do that. And when we put pressure on ourselves, we can stop before we start, right? So when I do that, what I like to do is just pick up a pen and just start without any expectations, without anything. I just start making a doodle. I start drawing the thing that's in front of me. There's something I'll teach you really, really quickly called the doodle game. Don't have to do this with me. You make a doodle on a piece of paper. Whoops, you can't see this. Like that. It's like nothing. And then you have to turn it into something. It'll kickstart your brain into like thinking in ways that are unexpected and creative, and you can't help but moving on from there. And in terms of like difficult subject matter, there have been some occasions where I have worked in settings. I did some work in Guantanamo Bay where I had, you know, some, to Sonja's point, like it was the opposite of connection. I wasn't allowed to talk to people. I wasn't allowed to make eye contact with people. And yet I was expected to draw in some way people. And my drawing is all about connection. So in that kind of circumstance, it's not my chosen situation. I can execute a task, but can't do what I consider to be good work. When I find myself in a challenging situation, but I'm able to connect with people through drawing, I end up finding a lot of hope and a lot of like humanity, and in more challenging situations, to be honest, than in the easy stuff, you know? And so I just might always been my temperament to dig deep, connect with people over the hard stuff, and find joy and hope in that.
And Wendy, you know, it's very powerful, the reflection on Guantanamo Bay. It sort of seems like your work is like the opposite of objectification, and you were put in a position there where you were like objectifying people who are already like, that's their problem. They're being objectified. So, you know, that's very rich.
Thanks for saying. I just to add one thing to that, I'm sure that everybody's going to experience that in their future work and careers, is that we don't always find ourselves in these ideal situations that allow us to do our best work. And I think we do the best with what we have, and we do the best work we can. And then we decide what we can learn from that, and we take it on to the next work. And sometimes we don't go back. And I would say that I would, even though I'm very proud of the work that I did, and it's important that it was done, it's not my chosen environment to work in.
Well said.
Thanks.
Sabila?
Yes. So my next question for Sonja is, every person is different, and no two people have the same experiences, relationships, financial backgrounds, or culture. So over the course of your research, have you found that there is an exact formula to achieving happiness? And considering these differences, how can each person achieve personal contentment?
Yeah, that is, thank you. That is really the kind of the billion-dollar question. Well, there's different ways of answering that question. One way is to think about how they're contributors to happiness, and you can put them into buckets. And they're the same for all humans. And one bucket is your life circumstances, like what you mentioned. Some of us are poorer than others, or live in a place that's safer or less, or not. Or we might have good relationships with our parents or partners, or not so good relationships. And that really affects our happiness. It affects our happiness more when our situation is bad. So if we live in a war zone, if we're in an abusive relationship, if we're poor, we're going to be unhappy, like no matter what, who we are. But if you kind of take people who are kind of relatively comfortable, and I'm not, I don't know enough about like every participant at KidSpirit, but I think I assume there's a range of experiences. So your life circumstances does affect your happiness to some extent, and some of them you can change, some of them you can't. So that's something you have to kind of think about. Then there's your genes. So genetics absolutely influence your happiness. And, if we all look around us and we know some people are just kind of naturally, more positive, happier than others. I think of it as like a set range. And then some people have set ranges that are sort of here and they kind of move like this, and others if your set range is a little bit lower, it does not mean you can't be happier. You're just going to have to work harder at it. Kind of like some people are like more naturally fit or skinny and they don't have to work as hard at it. And And then, but once you work hard at the happiness, at like say being grateful or meditating or whatever it is that makes you happy, it can become a habit and becomes easier. And then the third bucket, so we have 3 buckets, right? The first is your life circumstances. The second is your genes. And the third is what you can do about your happiness that you have control over, like how you think, how you behave, you know, the kind of like practices, exercises you do every day, how you think about your life. And that's the part actually I study, because that's the part we really can control. So we can get up in the morning and we can try to exercise or go or spend more time in nature, or when something bad happens, think about the bright side. By the way, I don't mean that we should all be thinking positive thoughts all the time, not at all, but there's definitely a time and place for, let's think about sort of, you know, what I've learned from that situation rather than ruminating about it and where I'm not going anywhere. I actually spent 10 years studying what's called rumination. And I think probably everyone, you know, who knows that English word knows that lots of people ruminate. In fact, women ruminate more than men. Rumination basically is like dwelling, where you're kind of going in circles and you're sort of thinking about how bad you're feeling. And that's different from problem solving, where you're going from like A to B to C to D, where you're actually kind of having insights or resolving a problem. Rumination is just kind of circular. Rumination generally does not really do you much good, although most of us spend a little time in it. And then maybe the idea is that you recognize it and then you try to get out of it. And there's lots of different ways of getting out of it. Some people literally wear a rubber band around their wrists and they will snap it when they find themselves ruminating. I mean, that's kind of a funny strategy. Some people learn to meditate or play basketball, you know, to get out of rumination. Anyway, so that's really kind of sort of my question. No matter who we are, we're all influenced by our genes, we're all influenced by our circumstances, but then there's sort of this part of happiness that we have some control over.
Sonja, that's so cool. And you know, one of the ways I've heard about that spoken of in other words is being like in a fixated state, and how do you get out of being in a fixated state? And I think, you know, we're human. I think that applies to all of us. And I want to switch it back to you guys, but just a quick follow up there, Sonja. I like, you know, you're a researcher, and you know, going through your work, there are all these sort of practices that people can do. And to what extent are you like a happiness practitioner? Like, what do you do to accentuate the positive in your life, and how can you transmit that to us so that we can too?
Right. What do I do myself? Well, you know, it's interesting because partly my answer is, as a scientist, I don't want to actually kind of let my personal kind of opinions or beliefs or practices influence the science. Kind of like you're big pharma and you really want the drug to work and you think it works, and that might actually influence how you do the study and the kind of questions you ask. So on the one hand, I try not to like let my kind of personal experiences influence the experiment. On the other hand, you know, I'm human, and we can't do that. We actually can't do that. We all have our biases. And by bias, I don't necessarily mean in a bad way. Like we just have we lean different directions. So I wrote a book called The How of Happiness. Sybil mentioned it in her introduction, that basically talks about 12 different strategies or activities people can do to be happy, like follow meaningful goals, like all of you are following, exercising, meditating, expressing gratitude, doing acts of kindness. And I did find when I was writing the book, it was kind of funny. Every chapter, you know, you kind of immerse yourself in this chapter, like the chapter on forgiveness, the chapter on gratitude, the chapter on meditation, acts of kindness. And then I found myself really practicing each of those. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should do some acts of kindness for my husband today after he comes home from work. So it has influenced my life. But I still kind of like doctors don't necessarily always have the healthiest habits, right? Just because you know what's good for you doesn't necessarily mean you do it. But I do really try to practice. And I guess my most important ones are like kind of more positive thinking, you know, try to, again, not all the time, but you know, there's a time and place. Try to, you know, think about the positive side of things and make charitable attributions about the other people. My latest, I'll just end with one kind of little hack. My latest sort of thing that I've been doing a lot is that, you know, you talk to people and they'll say, can you believe so-and-so did this? And it could be a friend or a family member or like someone on the news. And I'm really trying to have empathy, and doesn't mean that you excuse them or forgive them, but there's always a reason. You're like, what is that person's motivation? Like, and maybe they did something really bad, and I'm always trying to understand what's behind that behavior. And maybe you can help them, maybe you can't, but I think it is always useful to sort of try to have empathy, to try to understand why people do what they do.
Yeah, thanks so much. And Wendy and Sonja, do you have some questions for Sybille and Satya? Jump in.
Wendy, you go first.
I'll unmute and I'll start. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I have a question for Satya. Yeah. I would like to know a little bit. I mentioned this in your intro. I would like for you to explain to me, what is music therapy exactly? Because I know you play some instruments. I want to ask you about that in a second. But I want to know what music therapy is, what you're excited about it, what you think, how it can be helpful.
Yeah. So for the longest time, two of my biggest passions have been psychology and music. I've gone through phases of wanting to be a professional musician, wanting to be a therapist, but I kind of settled on, or as I'm entering into the process of applying for colleges and stuff like that, I'm kind of settling on the fact that I want to study psychology. And combining those two has been something that's been in the back of my mind, but I never really looked into it until recently. But what I found is it is such a beautiful way to help people who maybe aren't comfortable talking about their trauma, people who can't talk. There are videos of music therapists in senior centers, and there are people who have not said a word in decades, but you play some music and it connects with them in a certain way, and they just start telling stories about their lives, and it makes me cry every time. But I think that to have a career, a degree that perfectly combines those two loves of mine in a way that helps people, it really, really excites me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's wonderful. If you're feeling that way deep inside, follow that. That's just, yeah, it's great to hear. Thank you.
And Sonja?
I have so many questions for Sybille, but actually, can I just riff off a little bit what Satya just said? I have been doing some work with Steve Perry, who's the lead singer for Journey, the band Journey, and he is very involved in memory care centers. And so he comes in and he told the story how he came in, this woman who was 40 years old, deep into Alzheimer's, has not recognized her family members, just so tragic. And he started, but she loves Journey. So he started singing, and he's an incredible singer. And she just came out, and this, she recognized her son. So yeah, just incredible outcomes. Because the music can bring you, kind of like scent also, it can bring you back. So yeah, sorry, I don't want to take away from. Okay, so Sybille, I have so many questions. I want to really start with your travels, because I'm so fascinated. Well, first, one part of the question, I don't know if this is too personal a question, but you travel with your parents around Africa, and I don't know if you can say what it is that they do. It's fascinating to me that that you're traveling around Africa. But my question is, so if you feel free to share that or not. My question is really about what kinds of cultural differences have you discovered, between different African countries, or also other countries too, because Canada and other countries. Do you think that people in different cultures really differ in how happy they are on average? Is it true that people in some countries are happier for whatever reason, or they might pursue happiness differently? What are your opinions on that?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, my parents, so my mom is the founder and CEO of a social and economic development company in Haiti called Papyrus. And my dad also works there. They actually built it together, but for the first, I mean, I'm not sure how many years, but for the first number of years, he was working elsewhere, but they recently started working together again, which is really nice for me. But yeah, this time around, we're in Rwanda, and this is actually the first stop of a 7-country journey around Africa. So we're going to Rwanda, Uganda, Nigeria, Senegal, Ghana, Ethiopia, and I forget the last one, but it's a lot of countries and it's a lot of traveling. Yeah, they recently signed a contract with the MasterCard Foundation to help smaller development organizations across Africa strengthen their systems from HR to finance, etc. So it's a really cool learning experience for me too. But to answer the second part of your question, I feel like over the course of my travels, my perception of cultural differences has shifted very dramatically. The 2 countries in Africa that I'm most familiar with are Rwanda, where I am now and where my family's from, and Zimbabwe, where I spent around 4 months between 2021 and 2022. So when I was there, I found that the more I got to know the place and the more I got to understand that as people, we're kind of all the same. And though initially when I arrive in a new place, I'm typically struck with this overwhelming embarrassment of being a foreigner and like that everybody knows it, that I don't really know my way around, I quickly come to understand that despite the language barriers, the possibility of forming meaningful connections with people is still there, and it will always be there. And while we were in Zimbabwe, I got to know the woman that was cleaning the rented house that my dad's work had provided for us. And she spoke a decent amount of English, so that obviously allowed us to communicate every day. And she had lived a very difficult life. And hearing her sort of talk about her experiences and teach my family and me more about a culture we knew so little about helped us understand that the place we were in and the people we were interacting with were very similar to where we had come from. So I'm from Haiti, as I'm sure I've mentioned, and it's also a place, like a lot of you know, where people suffer a lot. And I've often had conversations with people in Haiti of, you know, different races and different social classes about the universal struggle that comes with living in a violent country. And when I was in Zimbabwe, though these things were better concealed and the violence was sort of not as intense, there was still pain and there was still suffering. And that prompted this realization that this whole idea of us and them, foreigner versus native, it really only exists if you believe in it and if you want it to. You know, we're all citizens of the same world. So no matter where we are, who we are, we sort of share some of the same experiences. And I know that, and I think that if more people believed that, we would live in a very different world. It's so easy to think that people's customs and their way of life in different countries is so different from our own. But I think that once you arrive in that new place and once you interact with those people, you kind of begin to understand that, you know, there's logic behind everything. And these differences become less cultural and more like differences in the ways people conduct themselves to accomplish the same goals. So for example, while I would typically drive to school in Haiti, everyone in this small village in Rwanda where I am now typically walks or takes a motorcycle. So I find that when I make an observation like that, instead of thinking, oh my gosh, that's so foreign, I would never do that. I sort of think it's a place and different ideas of what's practical. And that's helped me, people around me. I know I've been talking a lot, but to answer the third part of your question about happiness, I know I don't really think that culture has any impact on how happy a person can be, really. I know that there are some elements of culture which can contribute to mental health, such as violence and injustice and generational trauma, but I really think that life is what you make it for the most part. I think the number of people in Haiti who are living through insanely horrible and unjust situations but still manage to be happy is really astonishing. And oftentimes we associate things like violence and conflict with the quality of being unhappy. And while that can be true, and those things are really upsetting, they're not really the sole determinants of a person's happiness. And I like to use this example a lot, but sometimes when I visit my family in Canada, a place where people have access to all kinds of basic needs and services, I'm struck by the amount of depression and dissatisfaction there is there. Whereas in a lot of these less developed countries I've visited, people still manage to be happy and content. So ultimately, I think that happiness is in some ways a choice that we have to make every day. And that, sometimes obviously it's difficult to control our feelings for whatever reason. But I think a lot of the time we can just wake up and decide that we're going to have a good day and we're going to make the most of our situation.
Oh my God, Sybil, I'm just astounded by your wisdom, and like someone of your age to have that kind of perspective and that kind of wisdom is just incredible. And I hope that if you spend the rest of your life kind of communicating that and disseminating that to others, I think that would be a life worth living. So thank you for that. Amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome to KidSpirit, Sonja and Wendy. This is
I know, just one example of
really, it is really something,
Yeah.
and so thank you. I mean, I'm just like letting Satya and Sybil like wash over me too. Such heart and richness and wisdom. So yeah, how fortunate we are. And and there are a bunch of other youth contributors waiting in the wings. And so I'd love to invite people to hop in and ask any additional questions of anyone on the panel. You can use the reactions button to raise your hand, and then I'm trying to play it cool and not look at my cell phone over here, but the wonderful KidSpirit crew is out there sort of like fielding questions as well. So please hit the reaction button, raise your hand. The KidSpirit crew on background can sort of spotlight you so you can ask questions of Wendy and Sonja or Satya and Sybil. Let's see. Anyone on deck yet with a question? You can also pop it in chat. Let's see if there's anyone out here. Well, as we wait to see people get over the wait, I have a question for Wendy, says Noor. She's giving you the gesture. Come on, Noor. Does someone want to highlight Noor, or Noor, you can just type it in the chat? Oh, there we go.
Hey, Noor.
Hi. I have a question for Wendy. What made you stronger and more independent about writing and drawing books for or other things?
What made me stronger and independent for what part? Can you repeat that one more time?
Writing or drawing books and like other things.
What made me stronger or more independent? You mean
and Noor, also, can you just say where you are?
I'm from Jordan.
Cool.
Thanks.
It's a great question. So I'm just going to say it back to you. How did I get kind of more strength and independence in my writing and drawing? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a great question. Well, I'll tell you the truth. I think it's just practice. I think it's just showing up and doing it every day, even when I don't feel strong and I don't feel very independent. And I'm not that independent. Like I said, it's always a collaboration and we're always working with other people. But I think part of being an artist or a writer is being scared. I think that part of it is showing up when we don't feel like it. I think part of it is trying new things that make us doubt ourselves and all this stuff. And with all of that, just keep going. Just keep going. I've known so many people for the past, 30 years like that, who've wanted to be artists or have wanted to be writers, wanted to do anything in any creative field. And I look around and I see who is still making things today, whether that means they're doing stuff for the New York Times or whatever, or even if they're doing it at home every day because they just love to do it. I always wonder, like, who's still doing it? And when I look around, it's not the people who were like the most talented, who were kind of who seemed like everything came easy to them. No, it's the people who showed up every day when they were not feeling strong, when they were not feeling independent, and sat down and just practiced and just kept doing it. And two things happened. One, they got better and better and better with their skill. And the other thing is they formed a community, because those of us who make things seek out other people who make things. And we form this community just like you have here in the KidSpirit community. We support each other to keep going and keep doing it. So again, Then you don't, that's what gives me strength, is I know that even when I don't feel like it, I just sit down and I can do it. And that I have a community around me who will boost me when I don't feel great about doing it. And I get to celebrate others, which is super fun. Thanks for that question.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nora. Thanks for that answer, Wendy. We don't have other folks jumping in just yet. So like Satya and Sabila, if you have, yeah, Sonja, what's up?
Oh, I wanted to ask Sabila another question. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
It's a little bit relevant to what Wendy was just talking about, how hard it is sometimes to do what you want to be doing. I want to ask you about flow, and I just want to introduce the concept in case anyone's not familiar with it. So flow is when you feel really so absorbed and engaged in what you're doing that you lose track of time. And so you might find yourself like drawing or writing or playing chess, for hours, and then you realize like, oh my God, I'm hungry, or I need to go to the bathroom, and you've forgotten because you're so engaged. So do you I know you write, like do you often experience flow in writing, I guess is kind of a question. And if you do you have any advice about how to get into flow? Because that is and by the way, Satya also, I guess, could answer this question too with music or whatever, anything else that you're very interested in doing, how to get into flow. What is your secret?
So it's really interesting that you asked this question, because it's actually something that I think about a lot. And sometimes I get kind of mad at myself for, not sitting down and doing the thing that I tell everyone is my passion. It's like, I love doing this thing so much, but it's really hard for me to find the motivation to just sit down and do it because of, self-doubt and all that kind of thing, but all those kinds of things. But I find that once I'm in the flow, it's really easy to stay in it, but it's really the act of like sitting down and really starting that's difficult for me. As I mentioned, like the lack of confidence is real. It's something I struggle with a lot. I'm typically very hard on myself, and I don't really have much faith in my abilities sometimes, but I'm still learning how to address that and move on, which I think is, from conversations I've had with people my age and people older than me, I think it's kind of something that it never really goes away, but it gets easier, and you learn how to deal with it better. But if I could give one piece of advice to someone in my position, I think it would be to just be kind to yourself, and not be too hard on yourself, and not basically insult your work and say that you're not good enough or whatever. I think while humility is a very important thing, there's a difference between being humble and being self-deprecating. And while it's important to know that there's always something you can improve on, I think telling yourself you can't do it, or that you're not good enough, or that other people are better than you, is only going to harm you and make you feel more insecure. And I think as youth, we often see people our age on social media, especially, doing these amazing things and posting about them. And while on one hand, we can admire that and think that's amazing, on the other hand, it's very easy to sort of subconsciously hold ourselves to that standard. And we don't realize, and we have to realize, that life is really all about learning, and that we can't learn how to succeed if we don't fail. Success doesn't even exist without failure. Like, the word literally wouldn't exist. And I think that it's really important to remember that. Something my mom always says, as an artist herself, is that we have to produce things that we think are bad to sort of clear our system and get to the stuff we're proud of. And as a writer, I think if you write something you're not proud of, instead of throwing it away and feeling ashamed, you should sort of ask yourself what you can work on for next time, and what bothers you about what you've written, and what does or doesn't make sense, etc. And I think once you do that, not only will it be easier to find the motivation to sit down and write, but you'll also feel more confident in what you're doing, and the ideas will start to flow more easily.
Amazing. Thank you. So wise. By the way, I have a 12-year-old daughter who draws and writes, and she's such a perfectionist, and she'll just crumple up the piece of paper that she's drawing on and throw it. And I want you to come over to my house and give her advice, but that's so wise. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be helpful to unmute. I'm in a hotel, so there are like people rumbling by and stuff. Yeah, Satya, I'd be interested, the sort of Sonja's question to you, but also I just want to defer to Wendy. Wendy, if you have another question for Satya, and then we'll be pivoting to another thing in a few minutes.
Yeah, I do. Oh, there we go. I'm muted. Yes, I do. I know you play a bunch of different instruments. I think that's really cool. This is kind of like a sci-fi question. If you could, our imagination question, if you could choose like any instrument to play, any kind of performance situation anywhere in the world or beyond, if like, you know, in some way that you kind of dream and imagine about, maybe for some kind of audience, do you have some kind of inspiring dream you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I love this question so much. Music is, in my opinion, the most powerful thing that we have, and I think it has the power to connect anyone. And so there's no music that I have listened to that I don't like even a little bit. Wow. And because of that, my taste goes in like phases, I guess, which everyone's does. But right now, I have to say that I'm just obsessed with Japanese jazz fusion.
Of course.
of course, right? But at the time that you've asked me this question, I would love nothing more than to play. I should give some context. I've been playing piano most of my life. That's my main instrument, but I was never super into it until maybe 6 years ago when I started playing jazz piano, and that unlocked everything. But to sit on a stage with some of my closest friends who also play lovely jazz music, and to just jam for hours and hours, go as loud as we want, just crank up the bass. My school is right by Birdland in the city, which is one of the most famous jazz venues. I don't know if that answered the question. I kind of just got to geek out about music for a bit. So
No, I just want to reflect a little bit and say, like, that's just such a cool response, because I think you touched on things that we've all been talking about, like flow, like how artwork kind of unfolds, you know, about how letting go and doing things in connection with people ends up. So it's just really cool to kind of wrap up with this actual you doing the thing that we're all talking about. Love that visioning.
So sweet. That's really true, Wendy. And I want to pass this back to Adya for in a sec, but there's just one question for Sonja in the chat from Irina in Ukraine. Has your level of happiness changed since you started learning this topic 35 years ago and now?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Irina. Spasiba. I'm from Soviet Union myself, originally. So I think my happiness, well, remember, genetics are pretty powerful. So I've always been, you know, relatively happy person. I'm not like a 10, but I'm kind of like a 7 or 8. And so in some ways it hasn't changed that much, because in every situation I find myself, I kind of adapt to the situation, and I find myself, again, I mentioned that set range, I kind of find myself in that set range. But having said that, you know, life circumstances really matter, you know, and like having children like really made, you know, brought me a huge amount of happiness, also a lot of suffering too. But also, and this is really good news for all of you, you know, I was actually really unhappy when I was a teenager. So it gets better for those of you who are unhappy now. It totally gets better. Just the more confidence you have, right? The more experience you have with life, where you realize like you'll get through the day, or, you know, that those self-doubts yeah, they never quite go away, but they really, really, are reduced for most, not everyone, but for most people, I think. And so I think in that sense, yeah, my happiness has changed because I've become just sort of a little more confident. Socially too, connection is so important. Some people, a lot of young people, like don't yet have honed their social skills, and so the more the more years go by, like the better you're able to like just have a conversation with a stranger or not a stranger. Just the better social skills you have, the better you're able to connect, the happier you might get. And so yeah, just things, I guess that's the bottom line is things get better for almost everyone as they get older.
Thanks so much, Sonja. So yeah, I'd like to pass it back to Adya.
Hi, yes. Okay, so thank you all so much for being part of here as part of KidSpirit's global community. Since we're gathered together, we want to take this opportunity to showcase the winners of the 2023 KidSpirit Awards. Please enjoy the short video highlighting some of the award winners and their celebrations around the world. Thank you.
Has been a year of celebrations for the KidSpirit community. From commemorating KidSpirit's 15th year in publication to releasing a new anthology featuring hundreds of past contributors from across the globe. This year has been full of exciting milestones. Now, we continue the celebration as we recognize the wonderful achievements of the 2023 KidSpirit Award winners. Each year, KidSpirit's network of youth editors around the world vote for the writing, poetry, and artwork they feel most represents our mission to explore big questions in an open spirit. From over 100 pieces published in the previous 12 months, they select those that are the most thoughtful and inspiring to win a KidSpirit Award. To support meaningful festivities both near and far, KidSpirit offered award winners the opportunity to apply for microgrants to fund their special celebration. Hi. An award winner from Ukraine transformed her celebratory dinner into a sushi-themed birthday party with family. Another winner in Jordan grilled hot dogs and enjoyed a sunny day by the pool with his friends. One winner, hailing from Paraguay, gathered with family, friends, and her liaison, a KidSpirit alum, for cupcakes and festivities. In India, 2 award winners teamed up for their event and held a small reading to showcase their winning pieces together. An award winner from Texas had a book party and buffet to celebrate her achievements. Meanwhile, back in Paraguay, an award winner celebrated with her family and enjoyed a KidSpirit cake and decorations. Finally, another winner from Ukraine had a picnic with friends by the water, enjoying some delicious food and swimming in the river. A big thank you to those of you who shared your parties with our community. We loved having a window into your creative celebrations. Congratulations to all 26 of the 2023 KidSpirit Award winners and to every single one of our amazing contributors around the world. You are KidSpirit.
Thanks, Adya, for sharing that, and Luca for the narration of that. To Wendy MacNaughton and Sonja I thought I got this right the first time, and I know this is important, so give me 1 second to not be an idiot. Lyubomirsky, correct? Thank you. I mean, you know, obviously this was just such a special conversation today, and thank you so much for taking the time and being present. To Satya and Sabil, to the whole KidSpirit community, to everyone who's made this possible today. It's so meaningful for us to take the time and be together and share our passions and our, you know, what supports our creativity, what supports our well-being. We all need as much of that as we can get. We need to optimize this. So Sonja, I look forward to continuing to dig into your work for practices that can support us all. And Wendy, just such a gift, how you see and show and encounter the world. So it's just been so great. So thank you so much for taking the time today. And I'll pass it back to Elizabeth, and then we'll be saying goodbye to our adult observers and hopping into some small group work. So please, KidSpirit editors and contributors, youth, please stay on board. We're going to take a 5-minute break, but just want to, you know, thank you all so much for all the time and presence and wisdom that you've all shared with us today.
Great to meet you guys. Amazing. Thank you.
Really
Likewise.
wonderful. Thank you.
Really special. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lewis.